1. Dispatch. We have 22 wounded, 4 confirmed dead, 15 missing. Over.
It was just gonna be another hard patrol through the scrub. We were going fishing, and all we would get is a wet ass and no fish. God, it was hot. As we went out through the wire, none of us knew that by the end of the day, we would be fighting for our lives, and that the Battle of Long Tan will become the costliest single engagement involving Australian troops in Vietnam. "40 years ago, this was home. Nui Dat, Vietnamese for Earth Mountain. For the 5,500 men who would eventually live in its shadow, it meant Small Hill. It looks exactly the same now as it was back then. The only difference 40 years later is that walking up it, it ain't that small." When I arrived with 6th Royal Australian Regiment on the 14th of June 1966, Australian and New Zealand combat forces had been operating in the provinces around Saigon for just over a year.
The Australians had had a year's experience with combat forces in Vietnam before the task force was sent in the middle of 1966. That experience had proved not entirely satisfactory. The 1st Battalion to go, 1 RAR, 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, had served as the 3rd Battalion of an American brigade, the 173rd Airborne Brigade.
For the most part, they were under the control of the US and the commander of the Allied forces, General William Westmoreland.
The Australians had come to Vietnam through their experience of Malaya, fighting a counterinsurgency war where they'd been very effective, and they'd developed those techniques of patient patrolling, using stealth, deception, separating the enemy from the population. This 1st Australian Battalion serving with the Americans found they were involved in a very different war. They were there to fight big unit warfare, attrition warfare. They were there to bring the enemy main forces to battle and destroy them.
The Yank bases employed hordes of Vietnamese in a multiplicity of service roles, coming and going, in and out, so no bugger knew who was VC and who was just there to pick up your laundry.
This wasn't the way the Australians wanted to fight their war in Vietnam. It wasn't the training they had. They didn't believe this would be effective.
The blokes up the chain of command pushed to launch their own independent operations and established the Australian Task Force, 1 ATF.
Phuoc Tuy province was chosen because it was a place where there was significant enemy activity. It had a convenient port to get troops in and out. It was the ideal terrain for Australian style of operations. And it just seemed to be a place where the Australian effort could be identified as a national effort by sending in our forces and practicing our kind of warfare.
If this is our kind of warfare, you can have it. Phuoc Tuy, southeast of Saigon, was a known Viet Cong stronghold, and they were going to stick us smack bang in the middle of the hornet's nest.
Nui Dat was then chosen right in the heart of Phuoc Tuy as the spot to put a base. It seemed to have everything that the Australians required for a base area under their own doctrine of counterinsurgency.
was located right between known enemy bases, the jungles and the mountains. For the VC to get to the population, they'd have to pass right through our area of operations. The brigadier commanding the task force, David Jackson, imposed a 4,000-metre exclusion zone around Nui Dat, Line Alpha, and within that zone, all of the local population was cleared out. Long Tam was deserted, and the village of Long Phoc, a VC stronghold, was bulldozed. It was a shit of a job. Still, at least we knew if we encountered anyone within that area, they'd be the enemy.
So the Australians were throwing down the gauntlet by putting themselves in a base, interposing themselves between the enemy and the population.
Nui Dat, Earth Mountain, Small Hill. Don't worry, we had plenty of other names for it.
Just a muddy cesspit.
Jackson had established the task force, but 2 months later, we were still establishing the defences of an extensive canvas base camp, the perimeter of which was not yet fully secure.
The task force then only amounted to less than 4,000 troops.
1 ATF Task Force Command, 2 battalions, 5 RAR and 6 RAR, 1st Armoured Personnel Carrier Squadron, the Artillery, 1st Field Regiment, and 9 Squadron, RAAF in support from Phung Thao. We were all there, in the rubber surrounding Nui Dat, and overlooking us all, the SAS. We were a mixed bag of national servicemen and regular army, Nashos and Regs. Funny though, the VC who was shooting at you didn't know the difference, and to be honest, after 12 months of training together, neither did we.
I think that the National Service Scheme that was introduced in the early 1960s was probably one of the best experiments, if I could call it, that the Australian Army has ever made.
There was no distinction between national servicemen and regular army soldiers. Sure, we knew that the regular army soldier who'd been to Malaya or been to Korea had seen a little bit more of service life.
We got a bunch of 20-year-old, excellent young men, first-class young men, a whole lot of them.
We started off as a team, and that team trained together, lived together, slept together, ate together, and when we went to Vietnam, there was absolutely no difference.
As far as we were concerned, as soon as they marched into the battalion, they were to be accepted as 2-year regulars, if you like to put it that way. And that's how it worked.
Vietnam was like that. It didn't discriminate. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter who you were, where you came from, or how the hell you got there. We were there together, fighting. The big question was, for what?
I think we need to look at it really at 3 levels and consider it from their point of view as we knew the geostrategic situation at the time. Firstly, at the strategic level, our government was supporting the government of South Vietnam. It was clear that we were concerned that there was a march of communism in the area. We had the Malayan emergency and other things were going on. So the soldiers would have been well aware that they were there supporting government policy to assist the government of South Vietnam, who were having some difficulty surviving.
You've got to understand that in the context of the times, it was seen that communism was spreading and that this was both an action to save a specific country and, from an Australian point of view, an action to stop the spread of communism before it actually reached our shores.
Then at the operational level, in the province and in the area, they would have known that the Army of the Republic of Vietnam really didn't control very much. They controlled the ground that they stood on, and around them and amongst the people of the province, there was the Viet Cong and there was the main force, the North Vietnamese Liberation Force, and others who were operating quite freely. So they would have been told that this is something to work against, this is something that we have to act against.
From a basic soldier's point of view, we went over there not as saviours or heroes or anything like that, but as soldiers doing a job, and that was to look after the people and to fight a war.
And I think people genuinely believed that at the time and were convinced of the rightness of what they were doing.
Most important to them was that tactical level. They were infantry soldiers. They knew their task. Their task was to seek out, to close with and to kill or destroy the enemy. This was about close combat. They'd been trained to do that, It was something that they were familiar with. The soldiers who trained them had come out of experiences in Borneo and Malaya. Some of them who fought with them had come out of Korea, and they were well aware that this was a hard task, a task for infantry soldiers. So I think they were well aware of what was happening at the higher level, but they had a hard job to do, and they were focused at that. It was clear they were going to engage the enemy.
Close combat, the traditional role of infantry, battalion warfare. I'll make this really simple, because God knows when I joined the army, I didn't know how it worked either. 6th Royal Australian Regiment is an infantry battalion. In that battalion there are 4 companies, A, B, C, D, each containing 3 platoons and a company headquarters. After cutting our way through knife-edge elephant grass for 2 hours, we reached the edge of the rubber plantation at Long Tan. B Company was there, waiting for us. They'd been out overnight looking for enemy mortar base plate positions. Task Force Command at Nui Dat had been mortared the previous night. The attack by the VC was a first. The enemy mortars wounded 24. B Company had found the base plate positions, but not the enemy. Blood trails and gear left behind suggested they'd bugged out east. Pretty normal shoot and scoot tactics. And after the counter-bombardment from the Australian and New Zealand artillery, it looked like they may have taken casualties. Smith decided to follow up what appeared to be VC bullock cart tracks heading east through the Long Tan rubber plantation. It was an eerie place that the French had planted years ago. Raw materials, they reckoned, for the new industrial age. We reckon they meant Dunlops and prophylactics. Anyway, as B Company headed back to Nui Dat, to the sounds of Cold Joy and Little Paddy in concert, we headed into Long Tan.
Through the middle of the rubber plantation, over the top of one of the hill was a track, a straight track that had been cleared. We got to that and did an obstacle crossing to cross it.
Myself and Custard Miller were just approaching the track when I saw 4 or 5, 6 VC coming down. They were quite nonchalant. They did not know we were there because they would have not been walking down the track like they were, and they were talking. The rest of the company didn't have a clue what was going on because I'd been the only one who'd seen these blokes.
And just as we moved off into the rubber on the other side of the track, the firing started up where 11 was.
There's only one thing to do. I got up in the Armalite and fired a couple of rounds and dropped the sky.
This is 4-2. Contact. 8 out.
It's kind of chaotic for the first half a minute to a minute. And in that half a minute to a minute, it's the best time for anyone to react if you're under fire. And in this case, the VC got up and run like hell, and they broke out to the east.
Gordon Sharp jumped on the radio and reported back to me that they'd had an encounter with about 8 Viet Cong.
4, this is 4-2. Fetch Sunray, over. 4-2, this is 4, Sunray, over. 4-2, sit rep, 7 enemy, green uniforms, 100 yards to our front right. 2 enemy casualties, enemy bugged out east, over.
They'd shot one, but he was carried away, and he said he was following up, and I said, go for it.
But after around about 4 or 5 minutes, we're up again and we're following on, and the 11th platoon was given permission to chase.
4, chase them, get me advised, over. 4-2, roger, out.
I didn't take any notice of what they're dressed in, but they were dressed in green similar to us.
7 enemy, green uniforms, 100 yards to our front right.
Green uniforms. The point is, the penny hadn't dropped for any of us. The VC we were chasing down weren't wearing the usual black pyjamas of the village guerrillas.
Bộ đội du kích, rồi bộ đội địa phương, rồi có là bộ đội có trên, tức là trên có quân khu. Thì nói chung là 3 thứ quân đều là có trong một chiến tranh này đều có là kết hợp. Cho nên khi một trận đánh nào cũng có cả từ du kích có, rồi bộ đội tập trung có, rồi bộ đội cấp trên có.
The communists organised on 3 main levels. There were the main force troops, which in the case of Phuoc Tuy province was 5 VC division. This contained 2 regiments 274 Regiment, or otherwise known as the Dong Nai Regiment, and 275 Regiment. On the second level of Viet Cong forces was the provincial or regional forces. In the case of Phuoc Tuy, that was D445 Battalion, a force of about 550 strong.
Trong cái lúc mà tôi ở Phuoc Tuy á, thì tôi ở cái tiểu đoàn 445. Tôi vô đơn vị 15 ngày là tôi đã đánh trận thứ nhất. These
were locally recruited, whereas the 5 division regiments both contain North Vietnamese troops as well as local VC.
Đó là chủ yếu là bộ đội. Ở bộ đội là dân á, tại chỗ. Là bộ đội ở miền Nam trưởng thành lên.
At the third level were the local guerrilla forces. These were local companies, often only 60 to 100 strong.
Tôi đi vào bộ đội thì bộ đội địa phương. Mấy anh thường gọi là du kích á. Bộ đội phương. Mà tôi ở cái Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu này là từ năm 57 cho đến 75. Coi như 16 năm chiến đấu ở tỉnh Phuoc Tuy.
The enemy we encountered were wearing military uniforms. The uniform of the main force North Vietnamese Army. And the abiding theme of the North Vietnamese Army was their implacable resistance to foreign occupation. Ho Chi Minh ruled a communist North Vietnam, while the Americans propped up an unpopular minority government in the south.
North Vietnam had made a conscious declaration, having waited since the partition of the country since '54, they would now resort to military force to subvert and take over the south and unify the country. And it was that claim of unifying the country under one Vietnamese nationalist banner that had most appeal.
But in 1959, the North began to infiltrate South Vietnam with small and very often ruthless cadres of insurgents dedicated to swaying the rural South to the communist cause. These were the Viet Cong.
Đó là mục tiêu, nói chung là đánh quân đội của Việt Nam. Thì nói chung là đánh mục đích chiến tranh đánh để là nhằm giải phóng cho đất nước.
Large tracts of the South were soon under Viet Cong control. In response, President Kennedy sent the first military advisors to Vietnam to support the largely ineffectual South Vietnamese army who was spiralling toward defeat. The first Australian advisors followed in 1962.
The senior Australian military advisors at the time that we were considering sending forces to Vietnam had already formed the opinion that the war there was lost anyway.
When Ho Chi Minh ordered regiments of the North Vietnamese army across the border, President Johnson responded by committing US combat troops for the first time. Johnson then called for more flags to be represented in South Vietnam. Australia and New Zealand raised their hands.
By the time the Australians arrived with their task force of 2 battalions and support elements, the situation was still not good. The communists seemed to have more to offer to the people who they were trying to convince to join their side. They claimed that all the invaders were stopping their war of national liberation, and with some justification they could point to all of them, including the Australians, whom they called puppet troops, the puppets of the Americans, could point to them as little more than the next wave of colonial invaders, which the French had been a century before.
In April 1965, Prime Minister Menzies committed troops to Vietnam. And then a year later, there we were, moving through a rubber plantation towards an enemy we were never expecting.
We just followed up an extended line and we just kept on moving east at a pace that I look back on was most probably too fast. We then continued most probably another 150, going on 200 metres to the east.
There was 11, 10 and 12 platoon, I think, I'm pretty sure, but we were on the left-hand side anyway.
11 platoon pushed on further toward a clearing in the rubber.
Basically, I could say all hell broke loose with a heavy volume of fire, and that's when 11 platoon came across the enemy.
If they had waited another 15 or 20 seconds, or even half a minute, and we'd walked into their clearing, the whole of the 11 platoon would have been exposed to enfilade fire from the left, but they didn't. They took us from the left front.
I personally believe that the enemy that we came across ran back to their main force. They're probably just a clearing patrol.
We were stunned by the volume of fire. We could hear machine guns, and there were more than one machine guns, and we could hear the semi-automatic rifles. We knew instantly that it must have been at least a platoon.
I wasn't terribly worried about it. I thought it was probably an encounter contact that we'd had the same sort of thing before. But it was very obvious pretty soon after that there were a lot of the enemy there, because the volume of fire was incredible.
Grice radios Smith.
Generally, contacts are made from the front, not from the side. This is quite peculiar because it came from the side.
I'd say shits were trumps straight away for most of us, and then probably the training took over, but yeah, there was a hell of a lot of them.
I opened up, there's at least 2 machine guns, 7.62 RPDs, and some rifles and AK-47. They were that good that at around about 75 to 100 metres, they knocked over the left section. There's 6 guys there, 4 were killed and 2 were wounded.
Everyone reckons we got knocked off early, like our section, but, well, we were there for a while.
They most probably couldn't see the rest of us. They spread out for another 150 to 200 metres on the right of us.
Shorty was wounded first, and he yelled, he said he was hit, so Mitch said to me, "Can cover me and I'll go and have a look for Shorty." Then I yelled out to Doug, and as I was talking to Doug, he got hit by a burst of automatic fire. When I turned back, after seeing Doug get it, I was looking down the barrel of an enemy rifle. So, and I thought then, well, I'm gone here. As he fired, I dropped behind my backpack and the webbing, and I think at that time the bullet probably hit that pack.
After the initial fire, which only lasted for a few seconds, most probably 5 to 10 seconds, we all went to ground.
4 section on the left was hit the hardest. Those who could return fire did, forcing the enemy to the ground. Sharp had Buick move 6 section into an L shape to maximise their firepower across 11 platoons front.
So the 4 or 5 minutes after the initial contact is taken up with the passage of information backwards and forwards.
Sharp radios Smith.
I remember the noise of a lot of firing, which was far more than I expected. Gordon Sharp reported back to me that his platoon had run into a significant group of enemy.
Sharp estimated the enemy was platoon size, 30 men.
There's a creek that follows around the bottom end of Nuidat. They were on the other side of that creek, in the region of that creek. And that would have been, at the closest, most probably 125 metres from the extreme left-hand guy. There was no one in front of us until possibly 20 minutes to half an hour into the battle when they attacked us from the east, straight to our front.
The entire platoon was now fighting for their lives as the enemy attack increased from the northwest and southeast.
It's like just a magic finger taking little bits of slices out of the rubber tree where the bullets were coming through.
Buick moved 6 section into a reverse L, protecting the left flank.
So we then went into a defensive type of mode where I got the right-hand section to move them round to protect the southern flank. And we could just look after the northern flank as much as we could, but we had to stop this attack that's placed on us by possibly 80 to 100 BC.
That's when they started to show themselves. And it just got more and more enemy coming through all the time.
When they opened up on fire, we in fact done what we trained to do, is to bring fire to bear onto where the enemy is and bring artillery down. And that would have taken about probably 10 or 15 minutes.
Sharp radios forward observer, Maury Stanley.
This is 4-2. Catch shell rate. Over. This is 3-4. Over. 4-2. Target. Over. 3-4. Send. Over. at 3, 1 round, wait, over.
It was up to Maury Stanley, the forward observer, to react and provide artillery fire in front of 11 platoon.
At least fire some artillery, not close to them, but at least to harass the enemy or hope that it might catch them in a withdrawing position.
44, shot, over. 42, shot, over. 42, drop 500, 1 round, over.
11 platoon would have been 200-300 metres away from us. We couldn't see them.
Our main concern at company headquarters at that time was to try and provide support.
Smith continued to move Company HQ, 12 platoon and 10 platoon closer to 11's position, as Stanley, on the move, called in the artillery ranging fire.
44, shot, over. 42, shot, over. 42, drop 250, 1 round, over.
The 6 guns of the New Zealand 161 Field Battery, Maury Stanley's battery, were 5 k's away as they dropped their shells closer to 11's front.
A lot of my work was guesswork in the early stages. I don't deny that.
Stanley, guessing, as he likes to put it, continued the artillery bombardment. Bravo Company, 2 k's away, already knew their mates were in trouble when they were told to hold their position.
And as we waited, the battle increased in crescendo. It just got louder and louder and louder, and the artillery, and it's just, you could hardly hear yourself talk where we were. So we asked Zero Alpha, which was the headquarters, what we would do, and they told us to sit fire, hang on.
Almost immediately, there was some pop mortars fired from down to the south, and the mortar shells landed just maybe 20 metres to our south.
We were between the rubber plantation and the banana plantation. 50 metres or so, mortar fire started firing. Then it started to move up. Well, we took off.
I immediately moved the rest of the company around about 200 metres to the northwest.
We were standing there looking at each other and thinking, what the hell's going on? Where is everybody gone?
Under enemy mortar attack, Smith continued to move company headquarters.
So we started moving up, and I swear that those guys could see where we were because they just kept dropping the mortars.
Smith radios Colonel Colin Townsend at 6 RAR Battalion headquarters.
01, this is 4, sit rep, over. 01, send, over. Call sign 4 to report that enemy is reached our strength. Call sign is being mortar, so the line force nearby. Reinforcements, over. 01, I've got no one to send. Call sign 1 is activating back. Call sign 2 is only at half strength. Call sign 3 is defending our FDL, over. 4, call sign 2 to my location, over. 01, wait. Out.
Every move and report of that company is entered in a logbook, a battalion logbook, as it comes in. And then depending what the nature of that report is, depends on what response might be given.
5 RAR were miles to the north of Longtan on patrol. D Company were on their own.
As 11 Platoon became embroiled and not able to move, I spoke with Jeff Kendall, who said he wasn't in contact.
About that stage, I moved my 2 forward sections into assault formation, which is just a straight line from Arrowhead. And the reserve section stayed in Arrowhead behind me.
And I said, OK, go around and attack from the north and try and relieve the pressure on 11 Platoon so I can pull them out.
We just walked towards the sound of the firing. That's what you can do. On the lookout for whatever was going to happen.
The battle, for want of a better word, it'd been going on for some 15, 20 odd minutes or more, you know. And it was pretty much obvious to most of us in 10 Platoon that 11 Platoon were in deep, big trouble. Otherwise, why would Harry want us to go over there?
Smith radio sharp. With 10 platoon on the move, 12 Platoon assumed defence of the company HQ, and the enemy began escalating their attack. 11 was almost surrounded.
I had casualties, complete left-hand section, and a few guys around me were knocked over. Some were killed, some were wounded. There was no way I could pull out.
Sharp radio Smith.
The firing increased. I think Gordon came back to me and said, I think probably more like a company boss, or words to that effect, and that we're being pinned down and was taking casualties.
Sharp estimated the enemy at company size 80 to 100 men.
It is later on, that's probably after half an hour to 3/4 of an hour, when they started to flank us left and right, that I realised that we're up against more. I had at least 100 to 150 guys around to the north, east and south.
That situation didn't get any better.
We were in deep shit, and I'll use that term in every sense.
This stage started to rain, and from then on from next day it got heavier and heavier and heavier, as it does every day in Vietnam pretty well. I suppose we'd walked for maybe 100, 150 metres, and we saw people going across our front. Coming like that, in a straight line, if you imagine. And the straight line is going like that across our front. When I first saw them, I wasn't exactly sure where they were, because it was bucketing down rain. Everywhere looks black, no matter, because you're soaked. So, and they were wearing green uniforms anyway. We'd gone another 20 or 30 metres, and you could tell by the rifles, by the, some of them were wearing pith helmets sort of things. They're obviously not our guys.
As 10 Platoon moved to within 10 metres of the enemy advancing on 11, 11 Platoon's situation was worsening. Smith needed reinforcements. Smith radios Townsend.
01, that's Sunray, over. 01, Sunray, over. Sergeant Colfire, 42 is bigger than our Colfire. Request urgent trouble reinforcement, over. 01, my Sunray has confirmed no choppers available, over.
Nothing.
We asked for reinforcements. Unfortunately, the battalion advised me that they weren't going to send the reinforcements out by helicopters, which was what I'd asked. In hindsight, I don't think we had the helicopters available. In hindsight, I have to say I don't think the task force commander really wanted to get the Americans involved.
It's difficult to get orders across. It's better to sort of demonstrate what you want done, you know. And the guys were all waiting for it anyway. And I just went down on one knee and shouted out fire and started firing. And we opened up across the whole front, and pretty well decimated the right-hand element of that group anyway. I don't know how many people, but quite a few. So I just said to the guys, right, get up again and we'll go again. And we went forward again, went maybe another 10 or 15 metres, not very far. And all of a sudden we got a hail of fire.
The volume of gunfire in that rubber plantation was just something that I've got to live with for the rest of my life. It was just astronomical. It was just deafening.
The enemy attacked from two sides, wounding 3 and pinning them down. As Kendall called in artillery, radio operator Brian Hornung was hit.
4-1, drop 300, over. 3-4, drop 300, over. 4-1, 5 rounds, 5 foot. 4-1, this is 3-4, come in, over. 4-1, this is 3-4, come in, over. 3-4, I do not move 4-1. Cover 4, clear sign, 3-4-1, over.
Brian was hit through the shoulder, and the round went through the radio set, and it was out of commission. As I always said, to his credit, he was more worried about the radio set than he's worried about the wound. So we sort of stopped, and the stretcher bearer was treating him, and we got the radio off his back and tried to see if it'd go. The other two forward sections had just gone to ground. The guys who'd been wounded in that initial burst of fire, when we got them organised, I said we'll go forward by fire and movement, which is a basic tactic where one group fires and the other group moves, and vice versa.
And the first thing you do is put your head down. And that's exactly what happened, because you didn't want your bloody head to be shot off, you know. Wherever possible, you put your head up and you could see people moving in front of you. And there was just hundreds of these people just moving in front of you.
And we're just basically firing to the front. And, you know, it's just a waste of time, really. I thought this is just wasting ammunition. And I had a couple more guys wounded, and I thought, this is not a good move.
So at this stage of the game, guys were taking holes through their shirts and their trousers and their little bush hat and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, the 7.62 were flying around like bloody bees. And that's when he saw the baddies, or what we thought were baddies, up to our left rear.
We had half a dozen rounds or so fall right on the platoon, which did no damage at all, that's just amazing. For example, my platoon sergeant was actually lifted off the ground by the force of an artillery round and unhurt.
With 10's communications dead, Smith increased artillery support.
I realised halfway through 11 Platoon's engagement, we needed all the artillery we could get out there to try and stop the enemy. And I said to the fire controller, let's have the whole regiment.
Stanley, radio's artillery HQ.
I recall basically the passage of information was that you can't have the whole regiment because two of the batteries, there being 3 batteries in a regiment, were laid in support of 5 Battalion back at Eerie, which was to the north.
Normally, a battery will be allocated in direct support of each battalion. And in this instance, 161 battery, the New Zealand battery, was in support of 6 RAR. One of the Australian batteries was in direct support of 5 RAR, and one of them was in general support.
I recall jumping on the radio and calling up, and I said, I want the whole regiment, I want all the guns as quickly as you can get them.
Smith radios Townsend.
The fire controller, Murray Stanley, said to me not long after, we've got the whole regiment.
One battery fired a fire mission battery, then the regiment became involved, and then the mediums fired, and then we fired again, and it just sort of escalated from what had been a fire mission battery that Murray had called.
In addition to that, the American 155 regiment, 6 big 155 guns, they were being fired not in support of us because the artillery claimed they were unsafe to have too close to us.
The 155 for the Australians was a serious bit of artillery.
But the artillery headquarters back at base fired them in depth, shall we say 200 metres out beyond where 11 Platoon was.
If you take the 105mm, these guns were 155mm. The 105 had a 33-pound shell, the 155 about a 90-pound shell. Now, in terms of explosive power and what happens at the other end, it's a bit like the Richter scale, so it's exponentially bigger. It's not just 3 times bigger.
So the Americans, much to their disgust, I might add, weren't allowed to fire in close support, but they certainly caused havoc in the rear areas.
The guns themselves are very accurate, much more accurate than 105, but I think that they were seen as being the counter-mortar and the in-depth firing, when in fact they were quite capable of being brought quite close.
As the death toll continued to rise, the wounded who could began to arrive at company headquarters.
The wounded didn't come in sort of great rushes, say every 10 minutes, and you would maybe get 2, you maybe get 3. But it was consistent like that all the time.
Jack Kirby was looking after the wounded and sort of virtually guiding them to Corporal Phil Dobson, who was our medic, and he had established a small area to look after the wounded.
I can always remember the first wounded. He came in, and from his hip down to his ankle, and you would swear that it was a surgeon. It's just sliced the leg open. It's the first time in my life I'd ever actually seen a femur. I've seen the kneecaps, I've seen all the bones down the lower legs. Never forget it. And yet I could not tell you who the guy was. I don't know.
Brian Hornung had crawled back from 10 to Company HQ.
I knew him as the 10 platoon radio operator, and Brian had sort of said to Jack Kirby that the set was US, indicating that his radio set was no longer serviceable. 10 platoon had no communications back to Harry Smith. They could not call down any artillery. There was no way that they would know any movements between what 11 platoon was doing or what 12 platoon was doing, what indeed company headquarters was doing. So it was vital that we have the radio forward.
Well, you know, you've got to be able to talk to each other, and Jeff would be probably 200 metres away at that stage of the game. He's outside voice communications.
I then said to Jack Kirby that I've got a spare radio set here for 10 platoon, and when I said that, he simply said to me, "Go, go, go."
11 was still out there fighting, and as the wounded continued to come in, Yank, with the only spare radio, ran out in search of 10.
I don't think he exactly knew where 11 platoon were. Well, he knew probably in the general direction, but to find people in that rain and their gunfire, shit, good on him.
No one knew if 10 was even close to reaching 11. And with 18 artillery guns firing in front of their position, the enemy kept coming.
We got a raging thunderstorm. It is really bucketing out. We've got a mist just half a metre high. The noise of artillery landing 50 to 100 metres away from you is absolutely deafening. The small arms fire is cracking around your head. And then the antenna got shot off at 25.
11 platoon had also lost their radio.
I realised at one stage, particularly when their radio stopped operating, that in fact they may have been completely overrun.
And then Platoon Commander Gordon Sharp was killed because he was on his hands and knees to find out where the artillery was.
11 lost platoon commander, National Service Officer Gordon Sharp, 21, shot through the neck in the layer of gunfire just above their heads.
It came as a shock, not only from the point of view of our own mortality, but platoon commanders were not the first to be killed in a Vietnam environment, or shouldn't have been. So coming to grips with your own mortality was somewhat hard-hitting.
Bob Buick took command of 11 as Bill Urkel made his way to 10.
It wasn't until I took off that I realised that a 10 platoon was out there somewhere. But as I got probably about 100 metres, there was crack there, and there was 2 VC that was coming towards me. And I just opened up with the own machine carbine that I had and set off a couple of bursts. Fortunately for me, it worked, and it killed them. And I was able to then move forward, trying to locate exactly where 10 platoon was.
They were there, somewhere. The only problem, in a rubber plantation, everywhere you look is exactly the same.
All the reports that came through from D Company and from the artillery, because they have their own radio nets too, indicated that D Company were up against something big, and I was becoming concerned that D Company was going to become involved in an action in which it was going to find itself very difficult to extricate itself.
Townsend was pressing hard to send reinforcements by armoured personnel carrier.
I didn't push the APCs to go out, I pushed the task force commander to do something about getting us out there, because he controlled the APCs, I didn't.
But Brigadier Jackson knew that if he released A Company, the newly established task force base itself could be exposed.
I think he was engrossed with this idea of a Vietnamese attack on the task force base that night.
There wasn't enough information coming in. He had to wait. And with each new situation, Jackson's decision got tougher. Task Force had lost communication with 10 and 11 platoons. If that meant D Company was going to be overrun, there was enough reason to hold back A Company for the defence of Nui Dat.
I think the Task Force Commander took a bit of time making up his mind about sending us out.
Even if Jackson said go, right now, it would still take 90 minutes to get there. As it was, Jackson wasn't prepared to issue the order.
The need was there to get the communications to 10 Platoon. I can recall yelling out, "Mr. Kendall, Mr. Kendall," just trying to pinpoint where Lieutenant Kendall was.
I heard Bill O'Kell singing out, Mr. Kendall, where are you?" And he arrived with the radio, which was very, very pleasing.
There was no thanks to the checks in the mail sort of thing at that particular stage. It was all business.
I got on the radio and Harry said, "Come withdraw to my position now."
Jeff Kendall advised me that he had been pinned down and taking casualties, having killed a fair number of VC in doing so.
When D Company was beginning to suffer quite serious casualties, I wouldn't call them heavy casualties at this stage. And no, it does. I don't want to sound callous here, but no, it didn't affect me personally because I was concerned with the company as a whole, and that the company as a whole had to be assisted as quickly and as effectively as possible. And it was about that time that I ordered A Company on standby in case we had to send a relief force to help D Company.
But we didn't know to the extent of that contact and what the state of the battle was until we got back in and were fully briefed.
As A Company rekitted to go back out, 3 Troop 1 APC Squadron, the Cavalry, was alerted.
The runner came over from squadron headquarters and said, Major Bob Haggerty, our squadron commander, wants you with your map. I knew at that point that one of the companies was in trouble. I seem to recall being told that. Normally, if you're going out on a formal operation, you get about a 50-page set of written orders, but in an emergency like that, it was get up and go.
We were scrambled because there was something going on. It only took us about 5 minutes and we're off and we're over to 6 Battalion lines. That is where we had to wait for a while to find out what was going on. I think we were there for an hour, a bit over. And then finally we found out that D Company was in trouble.
For the guys still alive in 11, it just got worse. As the radio was restored, they were almost out of ammunition. Guys carrying automatic weapons were told to only fire single rounds at an enemy that was coming in waves.
And I was very relieved when, in fact, the radio came back on the air and I found that 11 Platoon was still half intact. Oh, look, I can't recollect my feelings. You know, you're a trained soldier, you go out there to do the best you can at the time with the resources you've got. I have to say that it was a feeling of perhaps sadness that I'd lost those guys. And I simply then pursued tactics to try and get them out. I instructed 12 Platoon, Dave Sabin's platoon, you leave a section behind because 10 Platoon was still out, hadn't arrived back. I said, you have to leave a section behind to protect the casualties that we had in the company aid post. And he went off with 2 sections. He only had 20 men in that platoon.
Dave Sabin and the 2 remaining sections of 12 Platoon swept around to the south as 11 reached breaking point.
My best assessment in hindsight was that originally the enemy sent a platoon forward, they then sent a company forward, and then they probably sent a battalion forward, and 11 Platoon was facing probably a battalion of, in the order of 600 to 700 enemy in various positions around them. was obvious from what Bob Eric was telling me that we're in trouble, yeah. Something more than 11 platoon could handle, and perhaps more than we could handle.
The enemy was estimated at battalion size 600 to 700 men.
We were advancing into a firefight, so it was very scary.
I also anticipated that we were going to be out of ammunition, and we didn't have a lot of ammunition for a protracted battle that I thought that we were going to be involved in, so I called back for an ammunition resupply urgently by helicopter. Going on, the artillery was coming down. I jumped on the radio and I got back onto the operations officer and called in an American airstrike to deliver rockets and napalm across the front of 11 platoon.
01, send details, over.
The airstrike was overhead within 20 minutes. The guns had been stopped, but the weather was so bad by this time, the afternoon monsoon, that they couldn't identify the smoke and they couldn't identify the trees and exactly our position. And this went on for a little while, and in the finish I said to Battalion Headquarters Ops, take the planes away and give me back the guns, because it was more important to keep the gunfire in front of 11 platoon than it was to have the aircraft at that particular time.
At Nieuwe Dat, the relief force, A Company and the armoured personnel carriers hadn't moved. And for Brigadier Jackson, the situation in the command tent wasn't getting any better. Chopper pilots Bob Grandin and Frank Riley were in the command tent.
The reactions were tempered, but very quickly became more and more intense.
Jackson asked RWF Commander Group Captain Peter Raw for the choppers to resupply D Company with ammunition.
The brigadier turned to Group Captain Raw and sort of said, can your guys do this? And he said, well, we're not allowed to go into a hostile area at that stage of operation.
The mission contravened air staff directives. In other words, it was unsafe.
Just everything I heard said to me, that's just suicide. There's just no way you could go out there full of ammunition and not get blown out of the sky. And Frank just stepped forward and started saying, look, I'll go, it doesn't matter. And somebody said, shouldn't we ask the CO? And Frank was very adamant, no, let's not ask anybody, because then they can't say no.
They needed it. 11 was still pinned, 12 hadn't reached them, and the enemy was still coming.
We were starting to get flanked ourselves.
The Viet Cong appeared to be ringing us, as in circling us. Just so many of them.
At that stage I had my first casualty. Diggers were being hit from that point on.
Crazy. Whizzing around everywhere.
We were probably between 200 and 250 yards behind 11 platoon.
12 couldn't get there.
I, in fact, got to a stage of hopelessness, and I look back now and I must chuckle to myself. I couldn't see any way out.
He sent that message to the company headquarters, who yelled out to me that Sergeant Buick wanted to fire in his position.
I knew that I had guys killed and I couldn't bring them back. As far as I was concerned, my job was then to get out as many as I could.
I I left where I was. I left Willie by himself, and I don't know whether I ran, crawled or slithered or whatever. I moved 5 or 10 metres over there, and I took the handset from their radio and spoke directly with Bob Buick. I said I wasn't prepared to fire on his position, but then he told me he probably had 12 men left. Anyway, I persisted and declined. I did not make any adjustments at all. He believed I did, but I didn't. But he later reported that the gunfire was falling closely but suitably.
Stanley had been controlling the 18 guns at Nui Dat continuously for over an hour, and he was calling them in, close.
When the platoon was overrun, we knew that we were firing on our own shoulders. Well, you just work harder just to make sure that there's never going to be a mistake.
I was fortunate enough to be able to get Maury Stanley to bring the guns in so that they were landing around about 50 metres in front of us. And that then effectively took out all the enemy that were giving us a hard time from the front.
The 18 guns were firing over 6 rounds a minute. You didn't have it.
On average, we were firing probably 8 rounds a minute at that point in time, which is 2 rounds above the intense rate.
The artillery falling between 11 and the enemy was the only thing keeping them alive.
The guys knew that D Company was in a very desperate situation. And the only way we could help was to fire as accurately and as quickly as possible.
On 161 battery, they had 2 lightning strikes. One knocked out the telephone switchboard, and the guy on the switchboard was actually knocked unconscious. He was thrown backward about 6 or 8 feet, knocked unconscious, so we lost all our telephone lines.
And the conditions weren't helping anyone.
At one stage, the toilet was blown to smithereens by a lightning bolt.
And at that point, you know things have really turned to shit.
I spoke to the task force commander and I said, look, we've got to do something about D Company because if we don't do anything, they're going to be annihilated.
Jackson agreed, and Townsend finally received the orders he'd been pushing for. B Company were ordered back into the rubber, as A Company and the armoured personnel carriers were ordered to assault on D Company's position. Grandin, Riley, Doyle and Lane were readying the 2 choppers as the ammo boxes wrapped in blankets for the wounded were thrown in.
We spoke about how desperate a situation they were in. And at the time, of course, I had no idea that they had less than a round each left.
No one asked for the okay, and no one cared if they had it. They were going. On approach to D Company's position, Grandin radios Rencher.
I said, I see orange smoke. And they said, wrong, wrong, wrong. And our instant reaction was that the enemy had been listening to us and had let go their own smoke.
They had one more chance to get this right. The window was closing. 11 needed the artillery back, and the rest of D Company needed the ammo.
We quickly did a 360 down south, called for smoke again, and red smoke came up from the same position.
The 2 choppers dove on the position, rolling on their side.
With a few kicks from the people in the back, we rained the bullets down on top of the CSM.
I wouldn't exactly say they rained down. 40-kilogram boxes of ammo that came crashing through the canopy onto CSM Jack Kirby nearly killed him. Lucky he was a big bugger.
My very loyal CSM Jack Kirby got a bunch of guys together, opened up the boxes. In those days, and it's all very well in hindsight, they should have been sent out to us in magazines and open cases, but there was no such procedure at that time. There is now, and there was afterwards.
It was Jack Kirby that went around delivering ammunition and words of encouragement to everybody, because he'd come up to our area as well, yelling out that we wanted ammunition and so forth, and just sort of throwing the ammunition out to us. You know, a very, very brave man.
Jack was killed 3 months later in an artillery accident.
We turned towards the base we called We're Clear, and the artillery started again, and you suddenly see all the big puffs of smoke as artillery shells were going straight up in front of us as we were flying back.
Arrived at ammunition was probably gave D Company long enough to hold out. They were getting pretty desperate.
D Company had their ammunition and 11 had their artillery back.
I knew that Company was back somewhere behind me, but I did not know exactly where.
I really had to stay put in order to keep the corridor open so that 11 Platoon could withdraw to us.
I knew I'd most probably taken at least 50% casualties. As it was, I had 13 killed and around about 8 or 9 wounded. So out of 28, there's 21 or 22 that had been casualties. There really effectively only 7 or 8 of us still capable of firing.
11 Platoon's radio went out for the second time, and this time permanently, and 11 Platoon was therefore not able to adjust artillery. At that stage, Bob had to make the decision to withdraw.
Vic Grice, carrying the radio, had been shot and killed.
Around that time I got hit by the artillery. It was like getting hit with a, say, 28-pound sledgehammer in the back. My stomach sort of went to the ground, my head came up, and my feet came up, and I felt as if they touched each other. I had no feeling from my shoulders down, and I thought, well, if I look behind, there's going to be nothing left, just nothing at all. And that's when I thought to myself, well, you've been a bit of a dickhead, because if you can think all this, you must be still, okay. And that's when the pain kicked in. I knew I had a bad wound because I could feel the air getting sucked in through me back every time I breathed.
When we withdrew, we got divided. The idea was to run back about 150 metres, reconsolidate, and then go from there. We had to make the initial break to get out of the bloody danger zone.
The way I could identify to 11 Platoon where our position was if I threw a yellow smoke grenade, which would be highly visible under the deteriorating light conditions.
About 5 or 6 came with me, the other 5 or 6 grouped off and they went back up on a different track, and they ran into Company while I saw the yellow smoke from 12 Platoon.
Within a few minutes, the 11 Platoon people, including the wounded that they were bringing with them, came to our position.
As the 11 Platoon survivors met with 12, the APCs were leaving the wire at Nui Dat when 2 were called back to 6 RAR headquarters to collect Townsend.
We were still fighting enemy advancing on us from both north and south. So they came out of one fire condition into another.
Company headquarters were in no better shape. The enemy had closed in on 3 sides.
I guess the order came from Dave. Somebody bellowed it out, go. And we did, and guys ran. Paddy Todd crawled, I think, because he was shot through both of his heels.
At the time that 11 Platoon survivors came back, Bob Buick was with them, was commanding them, and I said to Bob, "Where's Mr. Sharp?" And he said, "Oh, he's been dead for about an hour or so." It was a bit of a shock, because at that stage you imagined that 11 Platoon had a pretty rough time, but when we hadn't seen the bodies or anything like that. And the guys that came back were all, the guys that could come back. I certainly, I do remember thinking, this is a lot more serious than it appears.
Chaos of men everywhere, in the mud and the rain wasn't helping. No one knew who was who until they were on top of you.
my machine gunner yelled out to me and said, "They are on the hands of these crawling into us." I told him if he could see him, shoot him.
I remember shouting out, "Take your hat off." And because we couldn't tell who he was, somebody said, "There's a guy crawling back in through over there. And Paddy Todd come crawling back in with both his ankles shot through.
Luckily, with all due respect, my machine gunner was a terrible shot because he missed Paddy.
Paddy took his hat off, and then I think it was Buddy Lee ran out to get him, but I don't know.
It was Buddy, and he got shot 3 times, saving his mate.
You feel nothing. It was as if someone just walked up and tapped me on the shoulder with his finger. The only reason I knew I was shot was when my 2IC, the young man that I mentioned earlier, Jack Eerie, who got killed, in fact, helping me, because he crawled up beside me and he said, "How'd you rip your shirt?" I said, "I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did." He said, "You got no shirt on your back." Because when the bullets hit me, they just ripped the shirt right off my back, and I didn't even know. So he got up on his knees to bandage my wounds, and then he fell forward over my back. And that's how I knew he was dead. So, yeah. You don't really know that you're hit. Which is sad because those men who died that day didn't even know what hit them.
Stanley was dropping the artillery everywhere. It was so close, you could feel the earth quake under your stomach as the bullets flew over your head.
So I tried kneeling a couple of times. I gave that up.
What we had actually seen was in front of us, the enemy lining up, ready for the final assault. Colonel Townsend had said to Harry, "You know, I'm on my way." I think Harry's words were, "If you're not here in 20 minutes, don't bother coming." That's how desperate the situation was.
The APCs and A Company had entered the rubber.
The first fellow to engage was the far right carrier, Corporal Gross, who called enemy on the radio and commenced firing. Right across the front, from left to right, was this formation of something in excess of 100 people.
The enemy was moving around to shut the door behind us. This was it. We were gone.
It was a matter of firing and forcing our way over and through them.
The APCs engaged the enemy as some of the blokes from A Company leapt from one of the carriers.
When that ramp went out, they deployed the way they'd been trained to do without any question, and took up their positions and engaged the enemy.
The overriding impression I had was a very determined group of people who were going from east to west, who suddenly had this force that clearly they hadn't anticipated.
These ones obviously were coming south of D Company, obviously intent, from what we could work out and what we did find out later, to go around and actually surround them.
The people in the carrier, of course, can hear the plink of the rounds, but I don't recall that. I recall seeing the flashes, seeing the faces of the men firing at me, and I have to say the involvement of firing back at them. Yeah, that's the way it is, and you've just got to keep going.
After driving off the enemy advancing from the southeast, the blokes remounted the APC. It was getting desperate. Guys were still coming in wounded. They were piling up in the ditch. What a place to die.
Any medical training that I had and any lectures that I had, it was all gone out the window by this point in time.
The thing that I always remember was that some of the guys who were unconscious had their bottom lip pinned through their tongue. I'd never seen it before.
The aid post was like a garbage tip. You could hear the screams. It was endless.
It was to stop the unconscious fellas from swallowing their tongues, because, you know, you couldn't get them comfortable. They had to pretty well lie on their back to stop from getting almost drowned. The way you can't imagine how much water there was around the place. It really was the middle of an absolute bath.
I can't give you an answer why, how some of them survived, but they did.
If you think if you're a corporal and really you equate to probably not even an enrolled nurse, certainly not a registered nurse.
We had one guy that came in, he crawled in actually, and said he'd been shot in the ankles. He refused to have his boots taken off for me to look at. He said, if I'm going, he says, I'm going with my boots on, and I'm being quite sincere when I say that.
You know, you've done some first aid training and immediate battle casualty training.
We got one wounded there, and he'd been hit by a tracer bullet, and the phosphorus had not gone off until it actually hit the bone in the upper arm. No wonder the poor guy was screaming his lungs out.
But to have 14 or 15 wounded guys, some of them unconscious, tucked down in a little hollow in the ground, you know, it's a mighty effort.
And for some reason, don't ask me why, they had great faith in what I was doing. If they only knew that I do nothing.
22 men ended up in that ditch. Doc Dobson saved every one of them. If Stanley dropped the artillery any closer, it'd be on top of us. It didn't matter. They just kept coming through it, climbing over their own dead and wounded to get to us.
At that stage of the game, as the forward line soldiers will tell you, the bodies were 2 and 3 deep and the assaulting troops were clambering over their bodies trying to get through to us.
Very scary that these guys were so intent to get to us that they would go through artillery.
The APCs continued to fight their way through the enemy.
On the carriers to my left, Sergeant O'Reilly's section, were really being given a pasting, and the effect was that Corporal Clements was in fact mortally wounded. That's the point where I sent the carrier back out of the battle. And I can only say that compassion, I guess, overcame military judgment at that point. It was as simple as that.
Clements died 9 days later.
The Viet Cong had reorganised themselves for a major attack.
A final assault was going to come, a do-or-die attack.
It looked like being in trouble, and I asked Murray Stanley to drop the guns by 50, which means they come 50 closer to us. Back down the line from the Task Force Operations Centre, we consider that is unsafe. Well, you know, that was like holding a red rag to a bull to me, and I think my words were, look, just put the effing guns down where we want them, otherwise you'll lose the whole bloody lot of us. I just got a little bit upset that, you know, people from somewhere else were trying to direct a battle we were involved in.
Willie and I were lying there together in the mud. He had his radio and I had a map.
It was a competition between the enemy trying to get to us, the artillery keeping pace with the enemy, and us trying to shoot the ones that the artillery missed.
I had nothing else to think about except controlling that gunfire.
It was like a curtain of steel around the company that actually stopped the enemy from getting in. Well, it did. It did stop them dead, very literally.
I can remember Harry gave the order surround the wounded.
As the perimeter shrank, so did our numbers. Theirs grew.
We were surrounded and we were in pretty big troubles.
There were literally thousands.
We were ready to do something. I don't know what we were going to do, but we were ready to do something. I don't know what, but yeah.
You could still see them. It didn't matter what you did. They were still there, you know. And that's when I thought, we're gone this time. This time we're gone. They're just going to overrun us.
I think I can remember saying to my guys, if ever we're going to get out of this, you know, don't call it luck. Please don't call it luck.
If they get in amongst us, which if they keep coming the way they were, they'd have to, because we're getting low on ammunition, then you probably got to stand up and fight him. You should have a bayonet. Most of us didn't have bayonets. We should have. We didn't. So you'd be swinging your rifle at him, you know, and they're going to beat you by sheer weight of numbers, you know.
I said, at least we know that we're going to go down and fight, and, you know.
Many already had, and many more would.
I heard a shout from one of the diggers, get Paul.
So I glanced over and Paul's there, still just as if he was in his firing position, but he had his head down on the ground. And my first thoughts was, it's all got too much for him. He's just sort of frozen.
Two of my diggers, one on either side of him, jumped up and dragged him back.
So we raced over and I can still see his blue face.
For 3.5 hours he fought, and for Private Paul Large, it ended there.
I tell you, he wouldn't have felt anything because he was shot fair and square, right? Literally, as they say, between the eyes.
In the fading moments of daylight, our mates arrived.
Whatever they say or whatever you think, if you weren't scared going up the hill into D Company, there's something wrong with you. Especially when you saw them all over in the far distance and they're all lining up and, you know, you're only a few people. You think, well, are we going to see tomorrow or are we going to... Because the unknown's a frightening thing.
It wasn't long after that the APCs arrived, around about 7:10 on dark.
It was such a psychological moment, if you can just imagine. We're expecting another huge assault and thinking they're going to get in very close to us this time. And I think I might, from memory, had 15 rounds left. And all of a sudden, we heard the roar of the engines, and they came through maybe 100 yards up to my right, and then started firing the 50s as they were going along. And right across our front, the enemy just started to get up and go.
I was very pleased to see them arrive, I can assure you.
It was just at that particular time, at the critical time, when the armoured personnel carriers arrived, and I know they swept through our position with their 50s and 30s blazing away, and that was enough for the enemy. They just turned around and bolted.
I was one of the few that jumped up and, like a cavalry man, waved his hand and said, "I'm over here," you know, saved me from the Indians and all this sort of thing. It sounds strange, but that's what some of us did. And in fact, some guys even got up and patted and kissed the side of an APC, you know, if you could imagine the mud and the shit that's on the back of an APC. But these things happen.
I could have kissed every one of them, the APCs too.
Willie tells me later he said a prayer or two, whether he included me or not, I don't know.
He must have been smiling down on me.
At that point, total silence, absolute silence.
And there wasn't another shot fired.
It was unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. The silence, all the firing, all the guns, the rain, etc. And then suddenly, silence. Oh God, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Eerie.
The sound of the engines ticking as they cooled down was the loudest noise in the rubber plantation.
It was just absolutely the sweetest music I think, to my ears and to every other guy who was there.
The battle had ended.
My first thoughts, once I appreciated that the battle was over, to all intents and purposes, except for a bit of desultory firing here and there, the main thing was to get the wounded out.
To the west of the rubber, there was some banana plantation, an open country that would be suitable for an LZ.
As the dead and wounded were loaded within the silence that surrounded the battlefield, Alpha Company CSM Jack Ruffley and Lance Corporal Ross Smith crawled out among the dead and dying Viet Cong in search of Australian wounded. They found no one. And then in the pitch black, we walked away from the battlefield.
As we came out of the rubber into the area that had been selected for the LZ, we formed into a box formation.
I can still remember that they put all of us who they could find, both dead and wounded, and they formed a great big perimeter around us. So we were very safe.
One by one, the choppers descended into a landing zone on the edge of the plantation.
It was just so dark, and the crewmen were looking out the sides, watching for trees and things like that, and we just descended basically into an abyss.
I can recall myself getting close to midnight that night after the whole battle, that I got picked up and put onto a chopper along with other wounded. And they were using other choppers for the guys who got killed, just using them as separate to the ones of us who were wounded.
Warrant Officer Kirby, the CSM of D Company, asked me if my fellows would help load the dead because the infantry fellows found that a bit disturbing, and we did. Chaps did.
And they just come in a ground sheet and they're already starting to smell, and body fluids run onto the floor of the helicopters, so it's actually quite a nauseating experience. It's a depressing experience. You don't feel good, and as they were piling up, you start to worry about, gee, how many people actually did get killed?
We tried to organise ourselves in the dark. The platoon commanders and NCOs tried to establish who was present, who was missing, and who was known to have been killed or wounded. But many names went unanswered.
I knew that I had half a platoon still out there. I didn't know whether they were dead. I didn't know whether they were alive, wounded. And my biggest fear was that the Viet Cong would mutilate their bodies, as we'd heard as what their tactic was up north.
That night was pretty lousy. Thinking, oh, maybe they've taken them away, maybe there's been some prisoners, and you hear awful stories about bloody what they do to the prisoners and things like that.
Niner, this is 01. Sit rep. We have 22 wounded, 4 confirmed dead, 15 missing. Over.
We had trained for the battle and survived, but nothing had prepared us. It was the longest night.
I know when we bunked down, it was the first time I've ever slept with 2 guys. Jack Kirby, myself, and I think Geordie. We cuddled up together and slept. Sort of slept anyway, yeah.
In the cool of the morning, I awoke to the sound of choppers flying in the reinforcements from 5 RAR. They were followed by Jackson in a single Sioux chopper, accompanied by another 2 Hueys carrying his staff and the task force photographer. I saw a group of 12 platoon guys and went over. There was a pile of ration packs and full water bottles on the ground. They were preparing breakfast. Bugger. They were tired but could still spare a laugh. They'd probably had no more sleep than I'd had.
Next morning, it was suggested to me that I should take my company and go back to base and have a break, and I said, no way in the world. You know, my company, my soldiers are out there. I want to get in and see where they are, what's happened to them, and what we did, if anything, to the enemy.
Early the next morning, the commanding officer had his orders groups, and it was basically, Delta Company, we've got to go back in and assault into the battlefield. And Delta Company, you'll lead the whole battalion.
They were our guys out there, and Harry insisted we go back into the rubber first to find our guys who were missing and look at the devastation we had inflicted. I didn't want to go in.
At the time, we were told it was good for us. You know, we had to go back to the scene of the crime or whatever, that it was the thing to do. Didn't matter much who it was, I guess. It wasn't a very pleasant job.
And we thought, well, wait a sec, you know, after what we've just been through, why don't you pick on somebody else to do that? You know, we've done it. We've done our bit, so to speak. We've had it.
The gloom associated with the fact that a number of Australians were missing pervaded everybody.
Whilst we had those thoughts individually, now wasn't the time to get together and share that thought. Our thought was, let's find 11 platoons position and let's get retrieve those bodies.
A, B, C, and the remainder of D Company 6 RAR, along with D Company 5 RAR and 2 and 3 Troop 1 APC Squadron, were to assault the rubber plantation. What we saw was horrific. What we had faced, terrifying.
The thing that always I remember clearest, it was such a bloody great day. It was a good, really bright, shining morning, you know. And you walked in and all of a sudden we started to find these bodies. They were everywhere. You couldn't believe it. It was just, there were dead bodies everywhere. And parts of dead bodies and, you know, all sorts of things, because the artillery had fired all night after the battle. And, you know, it was a real shambles.
Carnage. Yes, there were bodies lying all over the place. It was pretty bloody. Most of the rubber trees had been cut down mainly by the artillery fire.
White latex rubber running down from the rubber trees where the bullets had gone through. There were bodies everywhere.
You think, how in the hell did they ever do this? You really do. Like the battlefield was only small. I know that surprised me. I thought it would have been some huge, massive area. I guess it was maybe 2 football fields. That's all it was. It was nothing large.
What we saw at that stage was absolutely astounding because it was utter devastation and carnage. We had never seen a battlefield like it before.
Well, we passed through this, what I call the cemetery of death. It was just something that you would not... It was just like a World War I scene. It was just decimation. It was the trees were splinters, the bodies were bits and pieces.
And the first dead that we came across were 3 fellows in greens who had no boots on, and they had a 60mm mortar. They had been, because of the rain, basically they'd begun to wash into the ground, or the red mud had come up, so that they looked as though they were being absorbed by the earth.
A lot of the enemy, they weren't old men. There was a lot of young kids like us.
And amongst all the debris on the ground were bodies and limbs. And in fact, I came across one VC that had no head, no limbs. He's just his torso. He'd been ripped apart, and it's just a torso lying there. Others, there was bits of body around and stuff hanging out of trees. And it was starting to go putrid.
The actual Viet Cong, you know, some of them just blown to bits with the artillery that had come in. You know, just shells for heads and nothing in it. Stuff like this, you know, limbs here and there, and again, and so hot and humid. The stench was...
Yeah. No, it's not an area I find easy to go back to, because there was lots of bits of people.
Nineteen-year-old kids having to see that, no, devastating.
We were to recover our dead alone. They were there where they fell, all of them, except 2.
We then moved into 11 platoon. That was an unbelievable sight. You still had all the guys lined up, rifles, you know. Most of them had their fingers still on the trigger, just basically frozen in time. That was a sight I would never forget. Would like to forget. Yeah, that was quite incredible.
13 of our mates lying in the mud, still.
When we got to where the 11 platoons were, it was, it gets me upset to think about it. But our guys were all lying down on their rifles, face to the enemy, and you can't do better than that.
Their weapons at the ready, as if defending their position. They were dead, but hadn't given up.
And I remember the platoon commander who was dead, he was slightly to the right and forward of that line.
Then, leaning against a rubber tree, weakly waving his hand, we found Barry Custard Mellor alive, shot through the mouth and arm, waiting as we approached.
Somebody said, "Hey, it's Custard, it's not a bad guy." And that was just marvellous, because we thought they were all dead for sure.
There were yells and calls of greetings, to which he replied, "You took your fucking time, didn't you?"
And he was not best pleased, I think, as I remember, from having been left behind.
As they tended to his wounds, they found the last missing digger.
I heard this voice calling out, "Sergeant, Sergeant Buick." Anyway, I thought, shit, who's this? Well, I raced over and there's Jimmy Richmond.
Alone on the battlefield, Jim Richmond had survived the night.
Jimmy Richmond should never have survived because he had blood in his lungs, and theoretically he should have drowned in his own blood, but he didn't. So Jim was lucky in more ways than one.
A couple of times during the night I yelled out for a medic, but I got shot at a couple of times, so I shut up and didn't bother calling out anymore. So I rolled over in the mud to try and use that as a packing to try and stop the flow of blood. I thought I was going to die of thirst more than anything else because I used up all my water, and there's a bit of mud around that tried to get some moisture out of, and basically just sort of tried to wait out the night.
Well, that's most probably the first time as a 25, nearly 26-year-old ever cried in the army.
I was happy to see them. I wouldn't kiss him because he's too ugly. But no, it was good to see them.
Lying on his face in the mud all night in the rain, he's still alive, incredible. Yes, it's salutary.
How they survived the night, the spirit of man, I guess. I don't know. Because I don't think Jim and Custard were too religious.
They were airlifted out. Jim Richmond woke up in hospital to the voice of a priest, reading him his last rites. The only thing that separated the flesh of the dead from the red earth of Long Tan was the flies. For 2 days we buried the enemy. When General Westmoreland arrived to inspect the battlefield, he turned to a group of diggers standing in the filth and said, "You've done a good job, fellas, but this is the dirty part." One digger looked up from the hole he was standing in and replied, "Should be right, mate. We can handle it." The informal address to the General in dry Aussie style created newspaper headlines. And they didn't stop. By the following Saturday, the Battle of Long Tan had hit the newspapers. Australia awoke to Vietnam. And in every state, someone had lost a brother, a son, and a mate. Among the 17 men who died on the battlefield that day was Private Paul Large.
On the Saturday morning, the paper came to us, and I was reading the paper, and I was just praying that it wasn't our brother.
The day we found out about it, I'd heard on the radio that so many of the boys had been killed.
Dad just walked in and he looked like he was going to die. Mum just turned away, just turned straight away and started to cry, and she just lost all life, it seemed like. It was just a horrible thing.
From a family of 5 sisters, he was the only son. His fiancée was waiting for his return.
Because Paul was working on the land, he could be exempted. And when we told Paul that, he wouldn't have it, a bar of it.
No, because
he
a few
just
of
said,
his friends...
my number came up and that's it.
And a few of his friends had also been called up
Very good
at
friends.
the same time, really close friends, and he said, no, if they're going, so am I. But as it turned out, he was the only one who passed the medical out of all his friends.
He spent his 21st birthday on a plane leaving Australia, stopping in the Philippines and landing in Vietnam.
When they had the final march through Brisbane, before they went to Vietnam, the crowds were lining the streets and they were marching along, and Paul heard somebody in the crowd sing out, "Good on you, dig." And he wrote in a letter to Mum, when that man yelled, "Good on you, dig," he said, "I felt very, very proud to be an Australian soldier."
He really was. He really was proud to serve his country. And we're all proud of him for being there too. Oh yeah.
On Thursday the 18th of August 1966, as Paul fought in the Battle of Long Tan, his little nieces and nephews sat at a kitchen table and wrote to him. Their letters were sealed in their respective envelopes. They were never sent and remained unopened for 32 years.
The gun carriage that Paul's coffin was on, they brought, and the soldiers, and they brought it past the house, our house. And I can remember Mum walking through the house, opening all the doors so Paul's spirit could go into the house.
The small town of Coolah in New South Wales, where Paul grew up, planted an avenue of 18 trees to honour those who fell at Long Tan. Paul's mother watered the tree planted in his memory every day until she died. It is the tallest tree in the avenue.